Hello, I am Riccardo Orrico from the University of Salerno, and this presentation is about international meaning. Specifically, I will report on a study that was carried out by Mariapaola and myself on the meaning of intonation in Salerno Italian WH questions. To begin with, I will say a few words about intonational meaning in general. We could say that intonation has often been linked to meanings such as sentence modality, and it is often assumed for several languages, for example, that a statement has to end with a fall and a question has to end with a rise. However, we know that the picture is much more complicated than that. And often what is found is a general many-to-many mapping between tunes and specific functions, which could be summarized by saying that the same tune can be used in different contexts, and at the same time, in the same context, different tunes can be used. This implies, first of all, that speech act analysis cannot fully account for the meaning of intonation. And second of all, that phonetic properties beyond AM phonological categories could play a role. For example, it has been reported for several languages that pitch span can encode pragmatic meanings despite being traditionally linked to paralinguistic meanings. What is more, we know that tunes can encode extra-linguistic information, as for example, socio-indexical traits of speakers, for example, gender. Therefore, in order to account for the meaning of intonation, we should be able to separate those variations that are pragmatically meaningful from those that pertain the individual level. Since a speech act analysis cannot account for the meaning of intonation, several models have treated the intonation by considering meanings related to the notion of commitment to a proposition. And we can say, just to give a simple definition, that commitment to a proposition implies that the speaker committing to the proposition is ready to stand for the truth of that proposition. Along this line, I want to mention just one model, which is the one proposed by Bartels in 1999. She classifies utterances as being either assertive or non-assertive. And as for English, this assertiveness is encoded within the low phrase accent. In general, her model predicts that intonation operates over salient propositions. And therefore, the role of intonation is, on the one hand, that of committing the speaker to a proposition, and on the other, to give an instruction by the speaker to the addressee to also commit to the same proposition. Crucially, this is a property of both statements and questions, though we know that for questions, it is a bit more complicated, since what is asserted is actually an alternative set and not a single proposition. This talk is specifically about intonational meaning in WH questions. And these type of questions are typically considered to be realized with a falling tune. However, research has shown that rising tunes can be used as well in several languages. And also that this kind of variation within WH questions is found to discriminate pragmatic functions in a language-specific way. Also, several accounts for the meaning of intonation argue for the need to have compositional analysis of intonational meanings, therefore to consider the independent contribution to meanings of pitch accents and of boundary tones within a tune. Furthermore, several studies have also highlighted that phonetic information within a tune beyond the phonological categories do encode pragmatic meanings in WH question tunes. For example, for several varieties of Italian, it has been shown that a wider pitch span encodes the difference between a counter-expectational question and an information-seeking question. In general, several models, as for example, Bartels, as I mentioned before, but also Trackenbroch 2012, classified WH questions based on tonal cues. And a traditional classification that is often made is the one between falling and rising tunes within a WH question, corresponding on the one hand to information-seeking questions, which are neutral, aimed at eliciting information, while rising tunes are typically linked to echo WH questions, in which the speaker echoes a previous utterance from the addressee because some piece of information was unheard or was not expected. The language under investigation here is the variety of Italian spoken in Salerno. Salerno is a city located at the south of Italy, as shown here in the map. And this specific variety has not received much attention in the previous international studies. And the few studies that do treat international meaning in this specific variety have focused on yes-no questions in both perception and production, though. What they found is a strong variability in both production and perception of these questions. And this variability can be partly explained by the pragmatic context and partly explained by variables at the individual speaker and listener level, as for example, sociolinguistic variables or cognitive variables. Also, what's been found is the systematic mapping between span information and specific pragmatic functions in both production and perception. The aim of this study is to report on intonational meaning in WH questions, which was found with a clear research question in mind, which is whether or not nuclear tunes in Salerno Italian WH questions correlate with different pragmatic types of questions. We predict that nuclear pitch accents and boundary tones have independent contribution in differentiating an information seeking from an echo WH question. Therefore, we predict compositionality of intonational meaning. Second of all, we give importance also to phonetic elements in encoding specific pragmatic meanings. And specifically, we predict that pitch span has a crucial effect with a wider span used for counter-expectational echo questions. Finally, variability at the individual level is also predicted. We analyzed data from a production task performed by 4 Salerno Italian speakers. The tasks were a discourse compression and a reading task aimed at eliciting 2 types of WH questions, information seeking and echo WH questions. And in the specific case of echo questions, we had unheard echo and counter-expectational echo questions. International analyses were performed using Choby's style international system, and we also collected pitch span information within the pitch accent region. And basically what we did is measuring the difference between local maxima and local minima in semitones within the nuclear pitch accent region. Here I will give you some examples of the tunes that we found. These 3 specific tunes are the most frequent ones found for the information-seeking condition. And they are different from each other as far as the nuclear configuration is concerned. Therefore, they differ either on the pitch accent in nuclear position or the boundary tone or both. The first one is a falling tune. Here it has an H plus L star pitch accent. As you can see, is very, very compressed, and it ends with a low boundary tone. It sounds like this.
Chi le vendeva?
The second one has the same pitch accent, the same falling pitch accent as the one before, but ends with a high boundary tone.
Secondo te che cosa le regalerebbero?
while the third one has a rising pitch accent and a high boundary tone.
Che cosa le regalerebbero?
This, on the other hand, is an example of eco WH question. Here we have a tune with a rising pitch accent labeled L star plus H. It is the same as the one found for the information seeking condition, but as you can see, it appears to have a wider span.
Cosa ti volevano servire?
Let's now look at the distributions of these tunes. Here I report a bar plot in which I plotted on the x-axis here the three different conditions and different colored bars refer to the different tunes that were found. It is clear that a one-to-one mapping is absent, and it appears also clear that the more complex mapping is found for the information seeking condition plotted here in the middle. However, when we split up the tunes and when we consider the independent contribution of pitch accents and boundary tones, we can see that a much clearer pattern is detectable. For example, you can see here that for the eco condition plotted here and here, only L star plus H pitch accents can be used, while in the information seeking condition, both options appear to be available, though this kind of question is realized more frequently with a folding pitch accent. As for boundary tones, a less clear pattern is detected, and as you can see, the type of question does not appear to predict the type of boundary tone. In fact, it appears that boundary tones are much more dependent on speaker-specific choices. And even if we have only 4 speakers, it is clear that they behave very differently from each other. Finally, let's look at pitch span data. We measured pitch span only for the L star plus H pitch accent, so only for rising pitch accent for one specific reason, because this is the only accent that can be used in all the conditions analyzed. Here I plotted pitch span information in semitones for the 3 different conditions. So we have here the 2 eco conditions and as you can see, the span here is wider than the information seeking condition plotted here. So generally we can say that differences are detected, and then span can differentiate across different types of pragmatic conditions. And also this difference appears to be statistically significant. To summarize, we found different tonal configurations for different pragmatic conditions of WH questions, and specifically a stable mapping was found between question type and pitch accent types. As for boundary tones, the distribution appeared to depend on speaker-specific choice. And finally, we also found that pitch span has a crucial role in determining the pragmatic condition of a WH question. In general, it appeared that tune variation in Salerno Italian WH questions is partly due to variation in meaning and partly due to variation at the individual level. Also, our results point towards compositionality of intonational meaning in WH questions, since, as you remember, the difference between an information seeking and an eco question could be derived from the use of pitch accents, which might be obscured in a sense when we consider the whole tune for the analysis. And this view is completely compatible with traditional AM meaning models and also with the recent experimental findings. Finally, we found that pitch span can encode the difference between WH question types in a very systematic way, and in the same way as was found for other varieties of Italian. Indeed, we also found that counter-expectational questions are encoded with a wider span. And this, since we are talking about pragmatic variation correlating with pitch span variation, these findings do not support theories assigning paralinguistic meanings to pitch span. We also found a strong speaker effect, even if we only consider a few speakers. And the variability appeared to be clearer in boundary tone types. However, we cannot really discuss these results in a very conclusive way, since we did not really test for the sources of this variation. But in any way, these results appear to be perfectly in line with recent experimental findings linking socio-indexical traits with the use of intonation. And in the specific case of Salerno Italian question tunes, a recent study has shown that boundary variability can be actually explained as an effect of exposure to other dialects of Italian. To conclude, we can say that intonational variation in Salerno Italian WH questions can be accounted for when we consider the independent role of pitch accents and boundary tones, when we consider the relative contribution of both phonological and phonetic elements, and when we consider also the impact of variability at the individual level. Here are some references. Thank you very much for watching this video, and please, if you have any question, do not hesitate to contact us.